Welcome to Earth Vimarsh. If you like the content of these videos and want us to contribute more in future, you can support our channel by subscribing to it and following us on social media platforms for regular updates. In this video, I'm going to explain the summary of Chapter 8, that is Slutsky Equation. This is the outline of the chapter. We'll be start off with the discussion on why we study this approach or how is it useful. Then effects of price change and the real income changes. Then we move to the discussion on pure substitution and income effects, and simultaneously overall changes in the demand. In the penultimate section, we'll be talking about the Slutsky effect for normal, inferior and the Giffen goods. And finally, we derive the proof of the Slutsky equation using calculus and conclude the chapter. So let's begin. Why is this analysis done or how is it useful? So we know that we have been talking about the two commodity case. Let's say it's X1 and X2 commodity, and in the market let's say that the price of one of the commodity changes. If this is a budget line, the one which I am marking in red, so if X1 becomes cheaper, we know that our budget line tends to rotate outwards, right? So we can buy more of X1 if X1 is becoming cheaper. So let's say that you in the market observe a very strange response to price change, response in a way that people are buying more of a particular good when the price rises. Okay, say for example, X1 instead of becoming cheaper, it became expensive. So you observe a particular behavior that maybe people are not buying more of X1, right? But it completely depends on the nature of the good. So it is possibly due to the relative magnitude of the income and substitution effects. This is what this Slutsky theorem is going to tell us, or the equation which we are going to see. It's going to basically decompose the changes in the demand, okay, which are resulting due to change in the prices in the market. So decomposing these changes into component parts can help us in understanding what drives the change taking place in the market, and individually separating these effects and particularly getting them quantified will help us in better understanding of how the policy decisions they impact the market outcomes. So let's begin with the first section. So what are the impacts of a price change? So let us say that a commodity's price decreases. So if this is X1, X2 space, you have X1 and X2 commodities. Let's say that one of our good becomes cheaper. Let's say X1 becomes cheaper. If X1 becomes cheaper and this was your budget line AB, we know that this is going to rotate outwards, right? It will be something like this. So now you can afford more of X1 at any of these points if you compare with the previous budget line. So each point on the new budget line is going to give you more of X1, right? So what happens as a process is that there is a substitution effect. Now the commodity is relatively cheaper, that is X1. So consumers can substitute it for relatively more expensive or other commodities, right? And what is income effect can be understood from this simple X1, X2 plane, that what happens when the income of a consumer is going to change. So for example, if the budget line was AB and as a consequence of price change, the new budget line is AC, when X1 becomes cheaper, so more of the commodities can be consumed from the resulting bundles. So this is what is being implied in terms of the income effect on the quantities demanded. To understand this concept in detail, let us look at the graphical analysis. Now we have a two commodity space, that is X1 and X2. The original budget line is given with this straight line, that is AB, and the budget is given as $y, or you can take it as M also, okay? M as a function of price times quantity of 1 and price times quantity of 2. So we have this original setup where our optimal choice is at point like this on the budget line. Simultaneously, what happens is that when the price of this X1 commodity is decreasing, right? Price of X1 reduced when we are witnessing a shift towards this side. So it pivots the budget constraints outward, right? For any case. Now, what has happened is that consumer had a budget of $Y or M. The price of commodity X1, it went down. As a consequence, we moved from AB to AB prime, right? And now what we are doing, now only $M, or you can say $Y prime. So which means that only a part of income is required to buy the original bundle, right? And this was our original bundle. Now we know that our new budget line has already rotated outside, right, at the new prices. So as a consequence, what we are implying here is that you need only M prime amount of income, or $Y prime of income, which is being represented by this budget line. Let's say it's PQ, okay, by this new budget line, as if the consumer's income has already increased by $Y to Y prime. It's basically what it's implying. Now say for example you had $100, all right, and you could have brought X1 and X2, right? And let's say that these prices were constant. Price of X1 is also given, price of X2 is also given, it's 5 and this is 4, let's say. So you know that your $100, with your $100 you can buy any of the commodity in a way that this constraint defines, right? And now let us say that the price of X1 has gone down, that is X1, this one. So obviously what happens, that this 5, let us say this reduced to 4, okay? Now your constraint becomes 4x1 plus 4x2 equals same income you had in your pocket. But now if you observe your consumption bundle, right, it's going to definitely go up. The number of units of X1 and X2 which you could have consumed with the previous constraint, it will be less than this new constraint. Now with new constraint you can buy more of X1 X2 bundles, right? So this is what is being highlighted by this shift of the income line, that it is saying that it is similar to saying that when you are moving to such a constraint that your income has increased. We can interpret it in that sense also. So that's why they are saying that we shifted from $Y or M to M prime, which means this is M and this is M prime, or this is $Y prime and this was $Y budget line. So this is about it. Now what happens, that the changes to the quantities which have been demanded due to this extra income, the extra income is the new budget line which we have shifted, right? Or in that sense you can take it as $Y prime or M prime, are the income effect of the price change. So this is interpreted as the income effect of the price change. The notable explanation in terms of explaining the effect of price change and its impact on the quantity demand was given by Slutsky, wherein he explained that if the price change is going to be there, it is because of either substitution or the income effect, okay, which both are working simultaneously and resulting in the change of the demand of the commodity. So our change in demand of commodity because of the change in price of a good, okay, it can be good 1 or 2 or both also, both as well. So that is specifically going to be a result of these two effects working simultaneously, that is substitution and the income effect. Okay, so we'll be looking into these now. Slutsky made key assertions in terms of explaining the impact on real income which takes place because of the change in prices. And how it happens? So Slutsky asserted that if at the new prices, say for instance this was our budget line, this is our budget line AB and this is X1 X2 commodity space. So if the price of the commodities changes, say for example if X1 was having P1 and X2 was having P2 price and the P1 changes to P1 prime, it can increase or decrease, right? So what happens because of the new prices is that less income is required to buy the original bundle, then the real income is increased. But if more income is needed to buy the original bundle, then we say that the real income has decreased. Now how to observe this? Think of the previous example, like I showed that a consumer had $100 in his pocket and the budget line was given as 5x1 plus 4x2. Let us assume that this is the budget line. So the price of first commodity is 5 units, okay, 5 units of the currency. It can be dollar or rupees. So, and the other good was for $4 or 4 rupees. Okay. Now what happened that the prices changed from 5 to 4. Okay. Price reduced for x1. It went down to 4, and for x2 it remained same. Let us say that this happened. So it's 4x1, 4x2. Now the new budget line, if you observe what points we get on the graph for x1 and x2, if x1 is 0, your x2 will be, because this was equal to 100, so it will be 25, right? And if your x2 is going to be 0, your x1 is going to be 25, right? So we know that this combination we are going to get. And on the graph, if you observe, so what happens is that for x1 and x2, if this is your x1 and this is your x2, so we know that the point we are going to get is 0, 25, right? Sorry, this is 25, 0. 25, 0, and this is going to be 0, 25 for that budget constraint. And also what happens, let's take some point in between as well. So let us say that you had x1 equals 10, right? So it's going to be 40. So the new the x2 will be how much? So it's going to be 60 upon 4, right? It's going to be 15. So this will be 10, 15, right? So it's going to be somewhere here, 10, and the 15 is going to be somewhere here. So this will be the new budget line. But let's compare it with the previous case. What happened in the initial case? So if it had been this budget line, we could have got the shape like, if it's x1 and x2, if your x1 is 0, your x2 is going to be 25, but if your x2 is 0, your x1 is going to be 20, right? So x1 was 20, it was somewhere here, and x2 remained same because there was no change for this. So our initial budget line was somewhere here at point like this, while the new budget line which we got, it had points like this. So we can clearly see here that the new budget line is rotating outwards, in a way implying that the income of the consumer has gone up. If such a thing happens, what we say is that the real income is increased. But if the opposite case happens, that had it been that the rotation would have been in this direction, if x1 would have become expensive, if instead of $5 or rupees, it went to $6 or $7, okay, so we would be witnessing an inward shift. So this is about what it wanted to assert. So let us now see it graphically how it happens, what I have already explained. So this is our original budget constraint and choice on the original budget line like AB in XY space, and the new budget line which is resulting because of the change in the price of x1, that is x1 becomes cheaper, is pivoted outwards. If we have to highlight the change in income, or when we say that the real income has increased, so how it's shown in the graph is that our budget line, it's shifting outwards, right? So this is what is being implied, that if the income increases, the budget line shifts to the right. Then what happens if there is a fall in the real income? So let us say that our budget line changes in a way that x1 becomes cheaper but x2 becomes expensive. So that's why this kind of rotation took place. So this rotates outward and this rotates inward. So here x2 became expensive and x1 became cheaper. So the new budget constraint is this, and if we have to imply the change in income or real income, we can show that our budget line basically it has pivoted backwards, right? So this is how it will be shown with a shift towards the left. The pure substitution effect. Slutsky isolated the change in demand due to the change in the relative prices by asking a simple question that what is the change in demand when the consumer income is adjusted, so that the new prices which are there, because recall that we said that, say for instance, if the price of x1 or x2 change, how the budget line is going to behave and what does it imply in terms of interpreting the impact on income or real income, right? So Slutsky basically is questioning that what will be the change in demand when the consumer income is adjusted. Now the income adjusted can be either backward or towards the right also, right? It can be increasing or decreasing depending upon how the price change has taken place, okay, at the new prices, and how much the income has to be adjusted so that the consumer is able to buy the original bundle. Okay, this is how he tried to understand, because once we know that how much income increase or income adjustment is required to come back to the original bundle, we can understand that what was the impact of a particular price change. Okay, what happens under the pure substitution effect? So let us say this is our indifference curve IC1, okay, and this is the optimal consumption bundle in the initial setup. Now what happens is that the price of x1 falls. As a consequence, the budget line rotates outwards. Now Slutsky questions that how much the consumer should be, how much the change in income should be to get back to the original consumption bundle which was here. So what is done, that the new budget line which was this, we do the compensated variation approach. Okay, this approach is called as compensated variation approach, which basically means that how much compensation should be there for the consumer to revert back to the original bundle. So here if we plot this budget line, right? So we basically are implying that this much amount of income, okay, change is there to restore him or her back to the original consumption bundle. Now what happens is that we know that the optimal point was initially here. Now when we are using the compensated variation approach, when we are shifting our budget line back towards the original consumption bundle, what is happening is that the optimal point will be where the indifference curve is going to be tangent, right? So this is the new indifference curve which is there, IC2. So the point at which IC2 is going to be tangent to the new budget line, okay, the one which is obtained by compensated variation approach. So that will be this. So this, let us say it's point Q. Now observe at point Q, your x1 has increased from x1 prime to x2 double prime, and your x2 consumption has gone down. So your bundle has a more of x1 and less of x2, which basically should happen intuitively as well, because x1 is cheaper. So you are able to afford more of x1 at the optimal consumption point. So this is the pure substitution effect taking place. Your x1 is substituting the x2. Now what is happening, like I have already shown that your x1 is increasing, x2 is falling. Now lower price of x1, which is p1, makes good 1 relatively cheaper and causes substitution from good 2 to good 1. Also, this entire phenomena is what we call as the pure substitution effect. Now what about the income effect? Now income effect implies the change which is taking place from x1 double prime, from this portion, okay, just observe here, x1 double prime to x2 triple prime. Why is this point being emphasized? We try to see that what was the change in income, right? it explained us that what was the substitution effect on the IC2. Now let us say that we give back to the consumer the amount of income change which is resulting in terms of the fall in the price, because if you remember, Slutsky told that the real income is going to increase if the consumption is going to go up with the change of prices, right? So as a consequence, what is happening? So let us say because of the fall in the prices, our new budget line becomes something like this. Let us call it LM. All right. So we moved from this point to this point because of the change in the prices. And as a consequence, the optimal point is going to be at a point where the indifference curve is going to be tangent to the budget line LM. So let us say that point is somewhere here. Now at this point, if you observe, our X1 had already increased during the substitution effect, pure substitution effect, and also because of an increase in income, the X1 consumption has gone up in the new bundle. And for X2, if you observe, it has also gone up relative to IC2. Okay, relative to this IC2, I am saying that our X2 consumption has also gone up. So what is happening in the process is that a change in demand due to fall in the price is the sum of two effects, that is income and the substitution effects, and which are being highlighted here in the figure as well. Now Slutsky's effect for the normal goods. Most goods are normal, that is their demand increases with income. This we have discussed in detail in the previous chapter. Now the substitution and income effects, they tend to reinforce each other when the good is normal. Okay, so how to understand this? Now let us say that good one is normal. Okay, because if we observe here what we had even discussed in the previous slide, so we can observe that the demand of this good is going up when the income is going up, right? So when we move to LM budget line from the initial budget line that was, let us say, LA, okay, so we observe that its demand is going up to this point from here to here. So definitely it's a behavior which is exhibited by a normal good. Now what happens is that income and substitution effect, they both are reinforcing each other here, which we already have discussed. Since both income and substitution effect increase demand when own price falls, which means the price of X1 when it itself is falling, the normal good X1, okay, the goods ordinary demand curve, it slopes downward. So this we know, right? So the law of downward sloping demand therefore always implies to normal goods. This we have already discussed even in the previous chapter. Now Slutsky effect for income, specifically considering the case for inferior good. Now we know that for inferior good how the behavior is going to be when the prices are going to change. So what happens when goods are income inferior? That is, demand is reduced by higher income. As your income goes up, as your M goes up, or let us say this was your initial budget, and if the new budget is here, your consumption for an inferior good is going to go down. So the substitution and income effects, they work in opposite direction, okay, when the income is going to change in case of inferior good. So for example, if X1 is inferior and the income is going to go up, so opposite behavior is going to be there, okay. Now let us see it graphically how it happens. So this is our initial setup. Let us say this is our LA budget line and this is our optimal point P, and we have a combination of X1 prime and X2, X1 asterisk and X2 asterisk. Now the new budget line has rotated outwards because X1's price has gone down. X1 became cheaper. X1 P of X1 P of 1, let us say this is P of 1, it went down. So this is highlighted here. Now as a consequence, we try to understand in terms of income when it became cheaper. So it means that budget line or real income has gone up. So this is represented by this budget line, which we are showing here, and from Slutsky's question that how much compensation should be there or how much income should be taken away to get back to the original consumption point. So we are showing this with the shift of the budget line backwards, which is this budget line, let us say PQ. Okay, this was LA, this is PQ, and this was initial budget line, let us say LA and LB. Okay, so PQ is the new budget line which we are showing that how much income should be taken away to get back to the original consumption bundle. Now about the indifference curve to obtain the optimal point. So we know that on the new budget line, this was a new budget line, so the IC wherever it's going to be tangent, so that will be the point of optimal consumption, which is here, and we can observe what has happened in the process. So X2 has gone down and X1's consumption has gone up. So this is what is being highlighted here as well. So the pure substitution effect is as for the normal good. Substitution effect, if you observe in the previous case of normal good also, similar thing was happening, that your X1 consumption was going up and X2 was falling. But what is different in this case of inferior goods is that the income effect is working in an opposite direction. Now why so? Because this is an inferior good, remember. So for an inferior good, when it's going to become cheaper, say X1 became cheaper, we know that the budget line rotated outwards. But when this is becoming cheaper, or in a way that your income is going up, you will never be willing to go for more of this, rather you will choose to buy more of X2. So intuitively what we have done is that when this change is taking place, when X1 is becoming cheaper, so the consumer is at a consumption bundle like this, at an optimal point like this on IC3, where this is tangent to the new budget line which we have obtained after the price change, right? So it will be somewhere here and not here towards the right, because remember this is an inferior good. That's why it's at point like this where more of X2 is there as compared to X1. So what is happening in the process is, when we had the substitution effect, X1 went down and X2 went up in terms of the quantity in our consumption bundle, which was somewhere here. But when the income effect is being studied, it's working in opposite direction. What is happening? Our X1 is going down, right? X1 is falling, and X2 it's increasing from point this to this, right? We moved from point this to this on IC2, and this was IC1. So as a consequence, X2 increased, right? So they are working in opposite direction here. So good one is income inferior, because an increase to income causes demand to fall. So this is being highlighted here for the inferior goods, and these two effects are working in opposite direction, and the overall impact, again, it's the sum of substitution and income effects. Now what about the case of Giffen goods? Now in rare cases of extreme income inferiority, the income effect may be larger in size than substitution effect, which causes the quantity demand to fall below as the price goes on increasing. Like own price, what do we mean by that? That is the price of X1 if it keeps on increasing. Okay, so the demand of X1 is also going to fall. So such goods are called as the Giffen goods. Now what happens in that case? Let us see graphically. So a decrease in the price of good 1, okay, let us assume that this is Giffen good X1. So a fall in the price of this good causes the quantity demand of this good to fall, right? So the quantity of being demanded will also go down as the price is going to fall. What happens as a consequence? So the price fell down, so we know that a decline in price caused the budget line to rotate outwards. As a consequence, we have an optimal point like this, right? And why not more of X1 is being preferred? Again, because this is a Giffen good, so its behavior is going to be that you are going to have more of X2 instead of X1 being consumed more. So that's why such opposite behavior is being observed. Otherwise, intuitively, a point would have been somewhere here where the x1 would have been more as compared to x2 because x1 became cheaper, right? But this is a Giffen good, so optimal point is going to be somewhere here. So a decrease in the price of this good, it causes the quantity demand of good 1 to fall. And if you observe the effects taking place here, what we observe is that income effect is negative because on the rotated budget line, when we are observing on IC3, we know that our x2 has gone up whereas x1 has gone down, which intuitively should not have happened, right? For a normal good, it should be that x1 should have gone up and x2 should have fallen. And likewise, if you observe for the substitution effect, it's like what already used to happen. What happens here is that the consumption of x1 in this new bundle, okay, it's going up, and the substitution effect for the case of x2 implies that the x2 is going down in the bundle, optimal bundle, which we have when we are studying it with the compensated variation. Now, Slutsky decomposition of the effect of the price change into pure substitution and the income effect, it thus explains that why the law of downward sloping demand is violated for extremely income inferior good, right? So we have seen this case that why it happens in case of Giffen good that they act, I mean they go against the law of demand. And now what we are interested to look into is the derivation of this theorem or the equation which we have been talking about. So if the price increases, we know that we try to adjust the income in a way which is enough to pay for the extra change. So change in income is the product of the change in the price and the quantity of x1, right? Like here, if it's x1, so it's going to be a mix of both. Then the total effect which we have been explaining so far, like for example the delta x1 we have been taking, that say for example if x1 became cheaper, right, it moved from here to here, so it's given as the product of x1 times its price, and it's a function of its income, right? You know that x1's demand is a function of its own price and income, and likewise x1 again is being expressed as a function of its own price and income. So this is what we are doing here. We are just reflecting it in terms of its function. And how to explain the substitution effect? So it's again what is happening is that x1 as a function of the prices, own price and the change in price, and the income with the change in income, because we are considering these changes when we are understanding the substitution effect. Remember, like for example, when we rotated from AB like initial budget line to AC like budget line, and then we did the compensated variation, which is essentially that we are getting to a PQ like budget line, which is basically telling us that how much income should be taken away to get back to the original consumption bundle, which was at point like A. So what we got to know was that the optimal point at PQ, which where the indifference curve is tangent at point C. So this will be the point, and this point C helps us in understanding when compared with point A that what will be the substitution effect, right? And to understand the income effect, what we do that we again shift the budget line with income, which would have increased in real terms when the price has gone down. So we move back to the original budget line from point C to point like B, which is tangent to the indifference curve on the new budget line. So the income effect, which is explained here, is again a function of its x1's own price and the income along with its income change, and it's difference from the initial price, before all these changes took place, right? So this is about it. Now how to go about derivation of the Slutsky equation using calculus, that in exams you can encounter, or that how to derive this expression. So we know that the total effect of the change in price, so if the price of x1 commodity changes, okay, delta x1, change in demand of x1 due to change in the price of x1, is given as a sum of the substitution effect due to the price change, okay, and the income effect which is taking place. So how to derive this? Now consider the definition of the substitution effect, in which the consumer's income is adjusted such that he or she just can afford to purchase original consumption bundle. Okay, so this is an assumption which we are taking, or this is a situation which we are taking. Now if the new prices are P prime, which is equal to P1 prime, P2 prime, resulting from the price change, then the consumer's actual choice with this adjustment will depend upon the new price, that is P1 prime and P2 prime. Okay, and the respective function which you already have, or I mean the consumption bundle, right? So for any price change, the actual choice with the adjustment will be dependent upon how the prices are changing and what the consumption bundle is. So, and we generally assume that the price of the second good is going to remain constant. I mean only one commodity price change we had considered, remember, like for x1 we have been considering that how the price change would have resulted in change in demand. So here also let us assume that price of the good 2 remains constant. Now let us define this relationship in terms of the demand function, which is given as substitution effect. Okay, that is a function of the prices and the commodity x1 and x2. Now suppose that the original price vector is P1, P2. I mean these are the two prices which are associated with the consumption bundles which we had assumed on a budget line like AB. Okay, and we are calling the income as M. So the Slutsky demand function, it tells us what the consumer would demand when facing different prices. Okay, and having money income. So we know that our budget constraint is given like this, as a product of prices to that of the quantity, right, and adding them for the commodities. Now this allows the consumer to afford his original bundle. So we are going to do it in this way. So the Slutsky demand function, which is a function of price and the quantity, is ordinary demand function at the prices P prime and M prime, right, which is the budget line. So it is given as this. I mean the equation 3 and 4 are summarizing these two functional form of representations, which are basically stating that how the substitution part can be represented in terms of a function which is depending basically on the prices and money income. Now this above equation 4, which states that the Slutsky demand for good 1 at price is the amount that the consumer would have had demanded if he had enough money to purchase his bundle of goods, which was the original bundle. Okay, so this is just by definition how we understand Slutsky equation. But what about the expression? We are interested in the proof part, right? What we simply have to do is that we take the derivative of this expression, okay, with respect to price. So what we get is that del x1s to that of del p1, which implies the change in price of good 1, like your budget line rotates outward to some point like this, okay, AC like point. And what you get out from the expression is that it's a sum of the change in the demand due to change in price plus change in the demand due to change in the income. Here M is the income, right? So we can observe that this equation 5 is basically summarizing this thing only. So the total change in the demand is comprised of these two effects, that is the income and the substitution effect, right? So this substitution effect due to change in price, it's being explained. I mean it's explaining that the change in demand with respect to price and change in demand with respect to income, or if we transpose these sides, I mean simply transpose that this expression to this side, what we get is that our change in demand of x1 del x1 due to change in the price del p1 is a function of, or a sum of, a difference between the two competing forces. That is how our substitution effect is taking place and how our income effect is taking place in impacting the demand for x1. So this is same to what we had represented in our previous slide in terms of the expression in equation 1. So this is about the proof of the Slutsky equation using calculus. Let us now summarize what we have discussed so far. So we have seen, taking the case of price decrease for a good in two commodity space, that if the price of a good is going to go down, if this kind of rotation is going to be there, the substitution effect is going to imply that the demand for a normal good increases. The income effect also implies that the demand is going to go up, with an overall effect that the demand for the commodity which is becoming cheaper, it's going to go up. For inferior goods, we have also observed what happens to the demand in terms of the substitution effect, where it goes up, while the income effect, it works in an opposite direction, reducing the demand for the good. But for the overall effect, I mean, it remains indeterminate, right? And for the Giffen goods also, we have seen that how these effects operate, which is more of like an inferior good case only. Now, what about the case of price increase? So I request you to please work out and try to understand how these effects work when the price of x1 is going to go up. So these are the results which you will be getting or should be getting. Okay, that your substitution effect is going to imply that your demand goes down. Income effect implies that the demand also goes down, and the overall demand also goes down. For the inferior good case, again, the results are going to be competing for substitution and income effect, and the overall effect again remains indeterminate. And likewise for the Giffen good as well. Another key takeaway from the discussion is the emphasis on the law of demand. So if consumers buy more of a good when their income increases, then they must buy less of that good when the prices increase, right? So this has been emphasized in the discussion which we have done. To summarize the chapter, when the price of good decreases, there will be two effects on consumption. The change in the relative price makes the consumer want to consume more of the cheaper good. The increase in the purchasing power due to the lower price may increase or decrease consumption depending on the nature of the good, whether it's normal, inferior, or Giffen good. The change in demand due to change in relative prices, it's called the substitution effect. The change due to change in purchasing power is called the income effect. The substitution effect is how the demand changes when prices change, and the purchasing power is held constant, keeping income constant. Your M remains constant. What is your delta X when your delta P takes place? What is your delta X? Keeping income constant. Okay, in a sense that the original bundle remains affordable, which we have been doing with what we call as compensated variation. Now, to hold the real purchasing power constant, the money income will have to change. The necessary change in the money income is given by delta of the price to that of the quantity of the commodity. Now, Slutsky equation, what it says is that the total change in demand, that is your delta x1, it's comprising of two effects, that is your substitution effect and the income effect, right? And whether it's positive or negative, right? Whether it's positive or negative, it depends completely, right, on the nature of the good. Now, the law of demand says that for the normal goods, they must have downward sloping demand curves, and this we have observed in our discussion as well. So this is about the chapter 8. In the next video, I'll be discussing the concepts on pricing and cost theory, and then we move to the market structures. If you like the content of these videos, please subscribe to our channel and show us your support on the social media platforms. Thank you.